Howdy folks, and welcome back to Home with the Gnome, where today I'm going to be cooking one of my favourite dishes. This is not a cheap dish, however. It's Colorado chili, which, despite the name, doesn't actually come from Colorado. The name actually refers to colour red, which is what this chili is going to look like when it's done. It's one of my favourite dishes, and it's not a cheap dish, because unlike a lot of chilies where you're perfectly fine using ground beef, for example, you actually need a fairly large steak in order to get the most out of a Colorado chili. Essentially, we're going to be cutting it up into chunks and then making our chili out of that. So, first thing I'm going to do is salt the beef. And here is my steak. I'm not quite sure how big it is. It's a rump steak. I know that everybody in Texas is saying that's not a big steak. That's big enough. Already salted it on one side. Now we're going to do the same on the other. You don't need to put a huge amount of seasoning on this, but do salt it well. The reason you don't need a huge amount of seasoning on it is because it's going to put... Now that I've salted it on both sides, that's going to go into the fridge for at least 20 minutes in order to let the salt do its magic. And while we're doing that, we're going to make a start on preparing the chili. So, here are my chilies. I'm using a mixture of, and they're all dried chilies obviously, a mixture of guajillo chilies and ancho mulatos. These are not only going to provide the basis of the flavour of the chili, but they're also going to provide the basis of the colour. Now, you can use whatever chilies you like, but it is obviously going to affect how it tastes and how it looks. If you don't like hot and spicy food, by the way, these are perfect, because none of them are particularly hot chilies. They just have a very sort of dark, dusky, smoky, and slightly spicy flavour. Now, normally when I make a chili, I take these dried peppers and I grind them up and make my own chili powder out of them. That's not going to happen today, and this is the reason why the Colorado chili is different. Instead, I'm going to rehydrate them. And to do that, we're going to pop them all into a jug. I'm just using my blender jug because it's a good size. Stuff them all down in there. And then we're going to top that up with boiling water. And we're going to leave them to steep in that boiling water for a good 20 minutes to half an hour. Might have to pack them down because you do have to make sure that they're all fully submerged in the boiling water in order to rehydrate properly. It's a couple of seconds later. I've used this tamper in order to get them all down under the water, and I've stuck a bowl on top to ensure that there's nothing poking up above the water, and it's literally just been a couple of seconds, but you can already see the way the chilies have turned the water very dark browny red. That's what we're looking for. Okay, it's been 20 minutes. The chilies are rehydrating nicely, and the salt has had time to work its way into the texture and fibres on the rump steak. And I've now carved the rump up into 1.5 inch cubes. And it looks like this. There we go. That's what you want. I've no idea how much beef is in there, but, you know, it's a lot. I realise everybody from Texas right now is saying, that's not a lot of beef. It's enough for me, and that's going to keep me fed for 3 days. Now that the chilies have had time to rehydrate, and this is a mistake I made the first time, because I just blended up the chilies in the water that they'd rehydrated in. Don't do that. You'll end up with a very bitter chili. All you want are the reconstituted chilies themselves, and yes, I have missed a couple. There we go. They're going to go back in the blender with a couple of other ingredients that are going to form the base of the chili. And those ingredients are tomatoes, peeled, crushed, whole, whatever you like. They're all going to be the same once they come out the other end of the blender, and beef stock, if you have it. If you don't have beef stock, chicken stock will do, but obviously beef stock is going to be better. I'm going to run that whole thing through the blender for a couple of minutes. The blender's done its thing, and now I'm just searing off the beef. I'm not trying to cook it here, it's going to cook in the Dutch oven over a period of hours. But I don't want it to fall apart the way you normally would when you're cooking a chili. I want these chunks of beef. It's what makes Colorado chili different. So I'm just putting a sear on them to add a bit of colour, a bit of flavour, and also ensure that they don't just disintegrate in the chili pot while they're cooking. About 10 minutes later, you can see it's all browned off nicely, and it hasn't quite reduced down with all of the... I mean, that's just the juices from the steak. I haven't added any oil or water to this pan. You don't need to. It's all browned off nicely, and normally this would be the point where you deglaze the bottom of the pan, but there's nothing stuck to the bottom of the pan. So you don't technically need to deglaze, but I'm going to do it anyway. Now, what you're going to deglaze with? You could use water. That would be fine. I've seen people use Coke. That will also be fine. Beer is a popular choice. I, however, because this is at the end of the day a chili, I'm going to deglaze with tequila. Because why the hell not? It actually just occurred to me, because until I started getting into cooking, I didn't know what deglazing was or what it was for, so perhaps a word of explanation is due here. Normally, when you're searing off meat in a pan, you'll end up with bits of burnt residue of meat stuck to the bottom of the pan. That's called fond. You don't want that stuck to the bottom of the pan, you want that in your belly, because that's all good stuff and tastes great. So deglazing is the process of adding some kind of liquid to the pan and then scraping it around in order to release all of that stuff from the bottom of the pan and get it back into your food where it should be. That's right, Akazuki. She doesn't know what deglazing is. The choice of deglazing agent or liquid that you use is entirely up to you. Water, stock, beer, Coke. I'm using tequila because I'm doing a chili and it just seems appropriate. But it absolutely doesn't matter. Just use whatever you've got. Now that's what I'm talking about. That's fond. All of that stuff we need to get off the bottom of the pan and back into the meal where it belongs. Getting a bit noisy now, I'm afraid. A healthy dose of tequila. And now we can scrape all that stuff up after turning the temperature down as well, of course. It's also had the benefit of giving the beef, as you can see, an even better sear. So now that we've deglazed, it's time to add the actual chili, which after it's been through the blender looks like this. You can see why they call it Colorado chili now. That's a lovely deep red colour. However, it is still a bit thick for my liking. Although Colorado chili is a big thick chili. So at this point, because this is still going to have to cook for a couple of hours, and during that period it is going to reduce down, I don't want to get it too thick. So at this point you can add some more liquid. The liquid that you add, of course, is entirely up to you. Water will be fine. But I have a bit more beef stock, so I'm going to add some of that. So I've added some extra beef stock here. You can see how it's thinned it down considerably, and that's going to allow me more time for this to cook. Not that it really needs to tenderize, because this is rump steak. It's pretty tender to begin with, but there's still going to be some collagen. Even though I did my best to trim off all of the connective tissues, there's still going to be some collagen in there. And that's not good. So you need time for the heat and the liquid to break that collagen down into gelatin and tenderize it all even further. This is the point where you're going to add your optional ingredients. And I realise this is controversial in some parts of the world for some strange reason, but I like to add beans. If you don't like beans, don't add beans. But I just like having some kidney beans in my chili, a little bit of extra texture. And the other thing that I do like to do with my chili, and this is definitely not a regular part of the Colorado chili recipe, is add some lemon juice. So that's the juice of one large lemon. You'll probably get away with more, but we're going to go with just the one. if you haven't tried a lemon in a chili, you owe yourself to try it, because it really just, like I said, this is not going to be a hot chili. Ancho Mulattos and Guajillo chilies are not hot chilies. If you wish to make it a hot chili, you could add some hot chili powder at this point. It's entirely up to you. You do you. But the lemon gives it a little kick without adding really any spice. And it totally transforms the dish without taking away from the base flavours. So I always try to add a bit of chili. A bit of lemon to my chili. At this point, if you want to pop any chocolate in, which is quite popular in Mexican chilies, this is absolutely the time to do it. But we've taken the temperature down. Actually, I'm just going to put it up a little. And this is the point where I'm going to put the lid on, and then we're going to let it cook for at least 1 hour, preferably 2, with the lid on, which will stop the liquids from escaping, and it won't reduce down with the lid on. And then another hour or 2 until it's reduced down with the lid off to the consistency and texture that you want. It's been cooking away for 2 hours now. I've just taken the lid off, and it's going to start to simmer down, because when you cook something with the lid on, it increases the heat, because it also increases the pressure by keeping all of that evaporating liquid inside. More pressure also equals more heat. So that will cool down naturally now. That's on a medium-low heat. And that's now just going to simmer away, reduce down and thicken up again for about another 2 hours. At this point, this is when you come down and you taste it for seasoning. Does it need more salt? Could it use some pepper? Is there anything else that the flavours are missing? I'll give it a quick go. Oh, that's good. It could probably use a little bit of cumin, actually, so I'll pop some of that in, but not too much. The flavours are good. It just needs a little seasoning. So I'll pop that in, and we'll be back in about 2 hours. And 4 hours later, well, actually 2 hours after we took the top off, here's how it looks. And that smells amazing. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, well, hang on, Jingles, that looks like more or less exactly the same consistency as before we put all that extra beef stock in, so what was the point of that? Well, yeah, that's true. But that was 4 hours ago. This wasn't cooked. If I hadn't put that extra beef stock in and then cooked it, this would have reduced right down to the bottom of the pan. It would have all burnt, and all of that lovely steak would have been welded to the bottom of the pan. Plus all of that extra beef stock is extra flavour. So, can I get this served up with some rice? See how it tastes. And there it is. So I'm having it with rice, but you know, it's chili. You don't need me to tell you what you can have chili with. Make it into a taco, make it into a fajita, whatever you like. I'm going with rice. And now, I'm going to have a taste. This is going to be worth the wait. Oh yeah. It's not particularly hot or spicy. It's just got that smoky, dark, dusky chili flavour. I mean, you can make it hot and spicy if you want, just add spices. But the best part about this, well, aside from how good it tastes, is that I've barely used a third of what was in the pot. So that is going to get sealed up and put in the fridge. You could freeze it and it'll be good for, well, I don't want to get sued, but at least a month, possibly as long as 2, but you should check on that. But it's not going to last that long for me, no, because that's going to get sealed up, popped in the fridge, and that's going to be my dinner tomorrow and the day after. I'm going to have some more because it is seriously good. And of course, when you reheat it, if you want to vary the flavour, just add your favourite hot sauce, maybe put some chili spices in, whatever. It's all going to be good. So much sauce in there as well, and it just goes perfectly with rice. Anyway, Colorado chili. It's not the first time I've cooked it. The first time I cooked it was a bit of a disaster Yikes. Because I didn't decant the rehydrated chilies from the water that they'd boiled in, and I simply blended them in that water. And it kind of worked, but it was too bitter. And I had to try to salvage it by adding brown sugar in to take the edge off the bitterness, and it kind of worked, and it wasn't terrible, but it was nowhere near as good as this. Don't use the water that you rehydrated the chilies in to form the base for the stock. Use chicken stock. Beef stock, if you've got it, works best. But this, I'm just going to get a big old chunk of steak. It's practically falling off the fork. Oh yeah, this is amazing. And I hope you enjoy it too. Anyway, that's it for today. Take care. Catch you next time.